Many years ago, I had a mentor for speaking. His name was Klaus Hilgers, and we lost him quite tragically in a sudden illness where he died in Europe. But one of the things that he said was that you should know enough about speaking to be able to use whatever tricks you need to handle your audience. You have to know your audience. And he taught me many of those tricks and many of those observations that he had learned. He tells the story about an afternoon where he was speaking with a group that he'd never spoken to before. And he's standing there at the lectern and he's thinking, they don't like me. They don't get it. They're not interested. They're bored. And he went through all of his bag of tricks and one thing after another, and he's still thinking, they don't get it. They don't like me. They're bored. And this man was a great speaker. I don't know anybody who didn't enjoy listening to Klaus speak. So he thought, okay, I've done my whole bag of tricks. They still don't like me. They're still not interested. What's the problem? And he looked at the audience, and he looked at what they did, and he went, okay, let's talk about death. And everybody in the audience sat up straight and looked at him and came to attention. He was speaking to the American Crematorium Association. You need to know your audience. And that was his biggest lesson to me, was learn to know your audience. So here we are in Toastmasters, and we are assigned this major task to get clubs distinguished and to do 50% or higher so that the district becomes distinguished. And it's a measure of success. And that's all it really is a measure of success. How successful are we as a district, as a division, as an area, as a club, as individual members of Toastmasters? And I know I'm as guilty as anyone else who's done the education for the DCP in assuming that, hey, we're all Toastmasters. You should understand this. It should be no big deal. It's easy. Those of us that have studied it very thoroughly know that it really is quite simple. And yet, we have gotten every excuse under the book, under the sun, under the moon, under the stars. And not just District 52. We're not alone in this. There were people from India, and India is burgeoning, one of the fastest growing areas in Toastmasters. And 2 clubs had the absolute audacity to write a formal letter to the district saying, we no longer choose to do the DCP. We will not be doing it. In my point of view, from what I know about it, then they're not a Toastmasters club. The DCP is the underpinning, the thing that makes us Toastmasters. It gives us the way of figuring out what it is. But we have to figure out who is our audience. And in fact, when you look at the DCP, and we're going to look at it in a minute, you'll see how we can go about knowing our audience and how we present the DCP to Club A, to Club B, and Club C. There are clubs in District 52, and I happen to belong to one of them, and Carolyn happens to belong to one of them too, where it's unthinkable that we would be anything but 10 points President's Distinguished. It just, our goal is, let's do it twice, let's do it 3 times, let's beat the hell out of Warner Center. That's the way we play the game. And yet I talk to other clubs, and it's like a deer in headlights. Well, I think I can do 5, but I'm not sure. Or another club, especially with the old timers, we don't bother with that stuff. We've been around so long, we don't need it. All of these are attitudes, but they're your audience. They're the audience we're dealing with. So we have to know how to deal with them. Now, when I'm giving officers training, I always ask the same question. If Donald Trump or some other major person in the business world came up to you and said, Bill, I have 10 points that if you follow these, I guarantee you, I'm not promising you, I guarantee you, you will be successful. Would you do it?
Sure.
Well, that's what the DCP is. It's 10 points. And if you do those 10 points as a club, you'll be successful. How do we know that? Well, Toastmasters have been around for almost 90 years. They have statistics on their statistics, about their statistics, around their statistics. They know. They've done the research. They know what makes a club successful. And doing those 10 points will guarantee that that club is successful. There's no way that club cannot be successful if they do those 10 points. So let's take a look at that now. I have copies here for all of you. Now, when you look at the DCP, who can tell me what the minimum requirement is for membership?
20.
Well, it depends on how many you have already.
Okay, good. Okay, those are the kinds of answers we get. The ideal club is a minimum of 20 members. That's the ideal club. But suppose you start on July 1 and you only have 12 members. Are you still a Toastmasters club?
Yes.
Of course. But in order to qualify for the DCP, you have to, on June 30th, have 5 more members. That is, at the end of July, at the end of June, you have to have an additional 5 members. So your total membership at that point has to be 17 if you start out with 12. What happens in some clubs is you'll have 20 new members and you'll go, hey, I'm okay. But you've lost 18 and you don't have enough. Or worse, you're back to 11 instead of 12. You're not qualified at that point. Well, why do clubs lose members? Well, the first reason is obvious. Life happens. We all know that. Especially if it's a corporate club, it could be downsizing. It could be the company moved out of the area. It could be any number of reasons from that point of view. But clubs that have been established for several years and suddenly die, what happened to them? And the research that I've done shows that what's happened is they've got so worried about the membership and getting the members in, they forgot to be Toastmasters. And the reality is, what makes clubs happy and fun is being a real Toastmasters club. Now, how do you convince all these different types of audiences that we're dealing with what works? Well, I could stand here and I could brag about the Renaissance speakers from here to doomsday, and people will go, well, that's great, Joe. You're crazy enough to get up at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning and sit there for 3 hours. Go for it. But the fact is, we have fun. It is a Toastmasters club. That's all it is. We like each other, and we insist upon 6 speeches every single Sunday. We get 15 people on their feet for table topics. We have 6 great evaluations. And by the time the meeting is over, we're all revved up and happy and ready to get on with the rest of our weekend and face on Mondays. And that is what we have to convince everyone else to do. But just standing up here and saying, okay, everybody, let's be happy! Isn't gonna work. Okay? So let's take a look at this. We know that we need to have a minimum. So how are we going to get that minimum? Well, if you look at number 7 and number 8, 4 more members and then 4 more members. That's where you start. How do you do that? It's with marketing. Now, some people will tell you, well, we'll just put a website up and everybody will come. Everybody will come. Well, I hate to tell you this, but I make my living in marketing. Not anymore. Not anymore. Doesn't work that way. Yes, you need a website. Absolutely you need a website. But you need other marketing tools as well. And what do we do extremely well in Toastmasters? We communicate. We enjoy being with each other. We're diverse. We're different. We're unusual in lots of different ways. And people who are in Toastmasters for the long run are in Toastmasters for the value, for that diversity, for the friendship. They like the excitement and the change and the exchange of ideas. So how are we going to present that? We can do that with open houses. We can do that with guest speakers where we invite other people to them. We can do that by just having a party. I mean, one of the things that Lance says is let's drink and figure out how to speak afterwards. There are a number of different things we can do. John Lau, who is the international president of Toastmasters, has the one-on-one program. What he says is if every Toastmaster member brought one member, just one member, the membership of Toastmasters International would double in less than a year. Now, why just one member? Because that one member is not just the guy off the street. That one member is your best friend or a good friend. Somebody that's not going to blow you off when you say, well, we're going to go to Toastmasters. Somebody that's going to hang in there with you. Somebody that you can go, gee, how come you're uncomfortable? Let's talk about it. Because you talk about everything anyway. When that occurs, then you get a really great Toastmaster member because they get the mentoring that they specifically need. Because you're their best friend. And you know what they need. And you know how to help them because you've done it already before in other areas. So that's another way of encouraging people. Just bring one person in. Just bring one person in. Then you can play silly games if your club is that kind of an audience. In Renaissance Speakers, we play lots of silly games. And right now it's the men against the women. And when the women lose or the men lose, the opposite sex has to stand up at the end of the meeting and bow to them. Oh. Exactly! Exactly. And fortunately, the women have won more than they've lost. So that's a good sign. But let's take a look at this whole thing. I mean, membership is one part of this. You have 10 points. Some people think you have to do them in order to be distinguished. Does anyone believe that? No. It's not true. I've come across officers who think that that's true. It's not. You can do any combination of 5 and be distinguished. Any combination. Now, personally, I can't understand any club not getting at least 2 CCs in a year. Come on. 20 speeches, you can't get 20 speeches even if you only meet once a month? Come on. Figure it out. It can be done. CLs, getting at least 1 CL. I don't see how one person couldn't get at least 1 CL. But again, that's me assuming the audience understands where I'm coming from. Warner Center goes through a lot of change in memberships every year. Much more than the Renaissance Speakers does. We are very different clubs in many different ways. But Warner Center probably gets 7 and 8 before Renaissance Speaker does. And from what I can see from the stats, Renaissance Speakers probably gets 1, 3, and 4 faster than Warner Brothers does. Doesn't mean we both don't get there at the same time. But you see where I'm talking about. This is one audience over here. We're another audience over here. So finding out when you go to you're going to go to a meeting, get on the god-awful dashboard of Toastmasters International, which I hope gets fixed eventually. Find out where that club is and what their history is. And I can show you. I have the history for a lot of them, so you can always call me and ask about that. But what you'll find out is what their history is, how they go about it. When was the last time they were distinguished? What made them distinguished? Because some of these things are really easy to do. Some of them are very easy to do. For example, number 10, one membership renewal on time. You have to do it twice a year, you only have to do one of them on time. And one club officer list submitted on time. So you got one already. You can easily do that. Minimum of 4 club officers trained at each of the 2 training periods. We're making that easier and easier all the time. So a club could have 2 of the 3 done already. And if their club is a lot like Warner Center, you could have the other 2, 7 and 8, done in no time flat. And they're big enough that they'll get 2 CCs, hands down, and there they are, distinguished. The other thing that's interesting, last year, we had more President's Distinguished clubs than we had Select Distinguished. And we had more President's Distinguished than Distinguished. Because what happens is once a club starts to roll on this, well, we don't have that far to go to get to be presidents. Let's just do it. So that's what this is all about. This is what knowing your audience and knowing how to play with this back and forth. My request to each of you as leaders working on leaderships is to help the district by visiting 1 club a month between now and June 30th and giving the same talk. Anybody interested? Okay, great. Madam Toastmaster.